Good morning, Namaskar. Welcome to StudyIQ IAS English. My name is Bhuvan Jha, and I welcome you to the editorial edge for the 9th of September 2023. Okay, on the agenda we have three important topics. First, we'll seek to understand G20 Sherpa. Today is a very important day as the G20 summit. You will have all the leaders that have already arrived yesterday. So the summit will be underway today. The presidential dinner is to be held this evening. So it's a very important day for Indian diplomacy and for students alike, okay, for you and I too. So we'll keep an eye out, but before that, we should understand the role of the G20 Sherpa, okay? Because again, if you look at, say, the G20 summit, one of the major sticking points has been the declaration, the New Delhi declaration that will be announced after the conclusion of the summit, okay? And so you have these different forces acting on the G20 right now, different interest groups looking for their own version or for their own commitment or for their own priorities in what should be reflected in the New Delhi Declaration. And one of the major, say, determinants of the New Delhi Declaration that will come after the conclusion of the summit is the role of the G20 Sherpas of each nation. Okay, so in India's case, it is Dr. Amitabh Kant, who is a retired IAS, serving IAS in fact, okay, ex-head of Niti Aayog, someone who's credited with a lot of reforms insofar as policies is concerned. So we'll take a look at the role of the G20 Sherpa. What exactly is that they do? All right. Number two, we'll seek to understand the outcomes of the meeting yesterday between Prime Minister Modi and President Biden. All right. You had both of them meet yesterday evening at 7 RCR, Lok Kalyan Marg. So we'll seek to understand what is the joint statement that has been released, because again that gives us a lot of fodder points insofar as the areas of convergence between India and the US is concerned, right? So we'll do that, number two. And number three, we'll take a look at NASA's MOXIE. Okay, this particular instrument has managed to go ahead and say create oxygen on the surface of Mars. So what is the process? What is the purpose? And what is the future insofar as the creation of oxygen on the surface of Mars is concerned, right? So that is going to be our agenda. Three topics that I have for you. 30-40 minutes is what we'll look to complete this whole session in. Meanwhile, if you want to go ahead and connect with me, this is my Instagram channel, all right? You can go ahead and if you have any particular questions for me, I'd appreciate that. This is the Telegram channel where you'll find the PDF uploaded at around noon. You have my email ID too that's also available here for your perusal. Right, let's look at the questions from the last class though. So last class we did an exhaustive discussion on El Nino, all right, La Nina, Enzo, right? So these were the basic concepts that we went ahead and say revised, okay? If you have any doubts regarding these concepts, may I suggest, take a look at the first 30 minutes of the last lecture on the 7th of September, all right? And so let's look at this question. Which of the above may positively influence Indian monsoons, right? So one of the ways to go ahead and say identify which of them will positively influence Indian monsoons is to figure out that each of them, how do they go ahead and affect my mascarene high? Because eventually you know that the mascarene high is directly say related to the outcome of Indian monsoons, okay? So you look at El Nino, obviously you know that this is not going to be helping us because here you find that the mascarene high is substantially pulled down, substantially withdrawn, okay? La Nina, again, you have lot of low pressure over Australia, which means higher mascarene high over mascarene high, which means better monsoons, right? So La Nina, yes. Positive IOD, yes. Where you have the Arabian Sea temperature, that is better than the Bay of Bengal temperature, which again helps with the onward movement of the Indian monsoons in the Indian mainland, in the Indian subcontinent, okay? Negative IOD, obviously not. Now a strong Walker cell. So the Walker cell, Southern America, Australia, and the circulation that so happens between these two areas, okay, that essentially comprises my Walker cell, okay, and you know that Walker cell is directly codependent on the trade winds that move the warm Pacific pool, correct? And so a strong Walker cell essentially says that your low pressure here over Australia is more, which means your high pressure over Southern America is more, right? Which essentially means that your mascarene high here would be stronger, which means again that the onset of monsoons over India would be a lot stronger, okay? So you're looking at a stronger Walker cell correlate roughly to La Nina, which means better monsoons over India, maybe even flooding, okay? Weak Walker cell, now you get it, Weak Walker cell means your Western Pacific pool hasn't moved to the extent that it should have, which means you're looking at El Nino. The drier conditions now over Australia, reduced masculine high, which means your monsoons are directly affected. And Modoki, where you have the warm Pacific pool form in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, okay, that does have a bearing on Indian monsoons also, and that it negatively affects our monsoon. So here your answers being B, C and E only, right? If you have doubts in this topic, may I do suggest that go ahead, have a look at the last class, okay? Identify the correct statements. Now, low index of oscillation and high index of oscillation straight away can be understood as the differences between Darwin and Tahiti, okay? This essentially is what you are going to calculate on a straight away, on a simple manner. Excuse me. So in a normal year, okay, you will find that, well, if the index of oscillation, which is the difference between, say, the parameters of Darwin and Tahiti, you compare them to an El Nino year, you compare them to a La Nina year. And what you find is that during an El Nino year, the pressure differences, the variabilities between these two locations is relatively low. Which means what? That essentially the warm Pacific pool that should have moved has not moved to the extent, which is why you are not expecting, say, a lot of high pressure at Mascarene, okay? So that difference, say P1 and P2 is what you're looking at, okay? So El Nino directly correlates to a low index of oscillation or low oscillation, all right? So low index of oscillation benefits the Indian monsoon, well, no, okay? When it's a low index of oscillation, you're looking at El Nino conditions, which means it is not going to be benefiting my Indian monsoons, so no. High index of oscillation in the Pacific Ocean benefits Southern America, which means again you're looking at La Nina conditions, okay? The La Nina conditions are to do with the high index of oscillation, which means that over Southern America, you're going to have increased high pressure. Over Australia, you will have increased low pressure. High pressure increased over Australia, which means the desiccating effect of the sea, the upwelling, all of that is stronger, which means better for their fishing industry, better for the guano, the bird feed, the bird excreta that forms the whole fundamental basis of the fertilizer industry, right? So the guano is benefited, which means high index of oscillation benefits Southern America, absolutely correct. B being the answer here. All right, question C. Enzo, are large pressure differences between tropical oceans of eastern and western? All right, here is your answer to this. Darwin, Tahiti. I have told you that if the differences here is low, you are looking at El Nino. And if it is high, you are looking at La Nina. Right? So Enzo, are large pressure differences? No, they are low pressure differences between the oceans of, say, the eastern and western hemisphere. All right. So incorrect. Enzo, are low pressure differences between tropical oceans of not northern and southern hemisphere. When you are going ahead and measuring Enzo, you do it on eastern and western. All right. And not northern and southern. So low pressure differences, eastern and western hemisphere, which means in this case, my incorrect statements are both. Okay, here it being eastern and western. If I had included this, this would have been absolutely correct. Okay, let's look at question D. All right, El Nino Modoki does not see much change in rainfall patterns over Southern America, Australia, South America. Your warm Pacific pool formed here, which means your low pressure here, which means one arm dives here, one arm dives here, high pressure here, high pressure here. Now, in a normal year, you know that Southern America sees high pressure, which means anyways, they see high pressure after El Nino Modoki, which means nothing changes for the South American folks. Whereas in case of Australia, which would normally see low pressure in normal conditions, which means rainfall would happen over Australia, well, that's not going to happen anymore because it's got high pressure. And you know that in high pressure, you are not going to have rainfall or a lot of rainfall because you're looking at descending winds. Okay. So El Nino Modoki does not see much change in rainfall over patterns over Southern America is correct. It results in reduced rainfall over Australia and India, yes, because high pressure created here, which means my masculine high is reduced, which means the onset of monsoons over the Indian subcontinent is also reduced. So your incorrect statements here being none. Right? Let's look at question E. Okay, a PYQ. During a thunderstorm, the thunder in the skies is produced by. Bear in mind, the question asks you to identify the causative factor for thunder. Okay, in thunderstorms, it's normally you're looking at cumulonimbus clouds. Okay, but the thunder essentially comes because here is your cloud, here are your charges. There is a column of air that is so trapped. And because of the collision of ice crystals and water, this charge that is produced keeps on increasing until to the point that this column of air is now forced out of the cloud, which produces the thunder. Okay, so in this case, none of the above being my correct option. Okay, let's look at question F for you. All right, if lightning is categorized as a natural disaster, victims can get compensation from which fund? All right, and the State Disaster Relief Fund is the correct option. Lightning is maximum in the northeastern states, West Bengal, Sikkim, absolutely correct. The maximum fatalities though observed in Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh and Maharashtra. So this is correct. The correct statements being all three. All right, we had discussed these, by the way. These facts were mentioned in yesterday's class. So for any of you who are watching this for the first time, well, this is what we do here. We look at the science behind the topic, the concepts behind the topic, as well as the relevance in the Indian context, right? So my individuals who have gone ahead and answered the questions correctly for me: Ulfat, Shubham, Monica, Anuj, Ashlekha, Crystal, Tanu, Koder, Pooja, Mandeep, Hani, Vinay, Karuna, Raghavendra, Ayush, Frown Clown, Akshay, Aditya and Rahul. Thank you guys firstly. Thank you so much for your participation. To the rest who are watching this live and who will watch this later, go ahead and look at the questions that I have for you today. Okay, a lot of it is modeled on the basis on the structure of the UPSC questions, and so if you go ahead and correlate the topic with the questions, it's going to help a lot with the outcome-based learning. That should be your focus, right? Let's get started with our discussion today. And the first one that I have for you is on G20 Sherpas. Now here is Mr. Amitabh Kant, who is the current G20 Sherpa of India to G20. Okay. Now what is the primary job of the G20 Sherpa? You see, he is the Man Friday of the Prime Minister or the head of state he is representing. Okay. He looks after the whole coordination aspect behind the policy or the framework regarding G20 and its issues that are related there. Okay. So let's look at it. Sherpa works on planning, negotiating and implementing activities throughout the summit. Now this draws reference from the Sherpa that you and I, we both know as our essential part of the ascent to Mount Everest, who do all the heavy lifting for the mountaineer who so wishes to ascend and climb Mount Everest. The same concept applies here. The G20 Sherpa does most of the heavy lifting. What is the heavy lifting? Forming consensus. For example, this year's G20. Okay. Now, a consensus is not likely to be achieved or may not be achieved for which of the following reasons? Well, you are looking at number one, the Russia-Ukraine crisis, right? Here is a forum which has both Russia and the United States, also China. All of these are present. Now, the United States would like the G20 summit's declaration to be very harsh on, say, Russia insofar as the Russia-Ukraine crisis. At the same time, Russia and China would like that statement to include their perspective also. Herein is the problem, which is why the G20 Sherpas, individual countries, each of the countries now have their own Sherpas, for them to sit together, iron out what should the statement look like. Okay, what is the build up to those statements? Because each country wants to protect its own interest. Okay, this is where the role of the G20 Sherpa is of prime importance. So let's look at it. They organize the agenda, look for political consensus at the highest levels, take part in meetings, all to help leaders better negotiate, right? Eventually what you find is that largely the summit's outcomes are almost 95 to 96% decided. Okay, it does not happen that you have, say, 25 high value heads of state all meet together in a city and then say figure out what they are going to write on. No. Eventually you are looking at possibly a paragraph here or a line there that might need changing today. Otherwise, it's almost ready. And who has made that ready? The G20 Sherpa of each and every nation there. Okay. So each member nation at the summit is represented by one Sherpa. Usually you're looking at the high ranking individuals or say the career diplomats, ambassadors, former people with a lot of experience who will be doing this job for them, because again, they are the representative of the head of the state that they're coming from. Okay, so let's look at the role of the G20 Sherpas. So what what I can tell you is that several pre-summit meetings have been held. Okay, so you have meetings from in the Indian side. You have had meetings held in Hampi, in Gujarat. Okay, the areas of socio-cultural significance. Okay, you have these pre-summit meetings where these G20 Sherpas meet. Now, what do they do there? So they will meet in advance of a summit to smoothen out conflict on various matters, right? You're looking at releasing a leader's declaration, which is expected today, and we realize that, well, there is many forces that are pulling this G20 apart. Okay, now the Sherpa track engages on topics from 13 working groups, but more importantly, where is the Indian Sherpa's contribution? What you find is that 2 new groups, Disaster Risk and Resilience Group and the Startup 20 Engagement Group. This has been India's focus. Okay, we'll understand why it is, because eventually what you're looking at is India using the G20 platform as a way, as a method to go ahead and talk about the rights, the responsibilities of the Western world towards the global South. Which means you're looking at disaster risk and resilience, which is of prime importance in the face of climate change. Also, if you're going to create jobs, employment, utilization of resources in a manner that is fair, inclusive and equitable, you have to include the startup realm in the G20 conversation. And this is what the India's G20 Sherpa has done. Okay, so the learnings for you here, that eventually you're looking at 13 working groups that were there originally, which have now been supplemented with 2 more working groups by the Indian side. Right? Let's go forward. So India's G20 Sherpas in the past. Right now you have Amitabh Kant, the former CEO of Niti Aayog. By the way, he is also the person who is credited with the Incredible India campaign. Okay, the Atulya Bharat campaign that we have heard of. Yes, the one that was launched in the 90s that did wonders insofar as harnessing India's tourism potential and showcasing it to the outside world is concerned. Right? Incredible India or Atulya Bharat, as you must have seen, say in various publications, it has been incredibly successful. Well, that was the brainchild of Amitabh Kant. Okay, so previously you have had Piyush Goyal, who was in fact the Commerce Minister of India, Suresh Prabhu, former Railway Minister, Shaktikant Das, currently serving RBI Governor, Arvind Pangaria and Montek Singh Ahluwalia, who had all served as India's G20 Sherpas. Okay, and you have also had Mr. Kant serve as the head of the Empowered Group 3 in the face of the COVID-19 pandemic. So he's obviously a person who is well acquainted with responsibilities and discharging them. And so you have to look at the G20 summit outcomes. What exactly is expected today, ladies and gentlemen? Firstly, what we have to realize is that yes, there are many forces that are working at play right now. Okay, and different countries have different priorities, different agenda, which they want reflected in the outcome document. Okay, so Saudi Arabia and China have objected to language with regard to fossil fuels. Right? Russia is threatening to veto any communication that does not take into account its view of the Ukraine war. Okay. At the same time, the Western nations want the joint communication, to be extremely critical of Russian actions. Okay. How will that play out depends a lot on the meeting today. Okay. The New Delhi declaration that is expected. Okay. The New Delhi declaration that will be released, the joint communication by all the members of the G20, the attending members. Well, that will be keenly watched. Will it have consensus of all the countries? Because if it does not, okay, or if there is no joint declaration that is released at the end of the summit, well, it will be the first time ever that the G20 has failed to form consensus. Okay, a failure to produce a communication would be the first in the G20's history. But what is certain? The statement will mirror the thoughts and feelings of the developing nations and the global South. India has been unequivocally, categorically, absolutely certain of this. Okay, that the global South's concerns need to be voiced in the joint declaration that is to be expected after the summit is over. Ashlekha, good morning, welcome. Right. Okay, let's go forward. So why is the G20 important for India? What's the brouhaha about? Well, eventually you have to realize that the G20 as a body now is coming of age. Okay, 2/3 of the world's population and 85% of the global GDP. The G20, if you look at the history of it, so 1999 it was set up, okay, after the Asian financial crisis. Now, initially, you had just the finance ministers and the Reserve Bank governors, the central bank governors who would come together and figure out what was essentially an economic body, a body to address the economic issues. Now, cut to 2007, 2008, and you know that we had the major economic crisis of that time. And that time, the G20 then upgraded itself, okay. So, from 1999, when it was just finance ministers and bank governors, you come to 2007 and 8, when you're looking at suddenly this whole G20 ambit now expanding itself to include heads of government. Okay. And thus it initially came together as a body of international economic cooperation. However, you'll also realize, and you will appreciate this, that well, economics is interlinked, okay, and it is closely interlinked with geopolitics. And eventually you find that the G20 now, besides economic cooperation, also voices a lot on other issues, be it climate or energy or security even, okay. You will look at the G20 that has now expanded its ambit over time. And why has it been able to do that? Well, because it includes the aspirational countries, it includes the developed countries, and you have a common platform to engage with these forces, which is why the G20's outcome document will be of prime importance. We ought to have a very close look at that. Okay. Bulbul, good morning, welcome. So G20, India has the presidency at a crucial juncture. You are looking at Russia-Ukraine war, increased crude oil prices. Well, these are just some of the ones. You are also looking at the US-China decoupling. Okay. You are looking at de-dollarization that is going on. Okay. So several issues are there. You're looking at sustainable goals, Agenda 2030, right? Wherein, well, some of the goals will not be met. It's almost clear now. Okay. And so accelerated sustainable goals, development goals have now been promoted and produced. Okay. So a lot of areas where there is a lot of work to be done. Okay. So because of this, India's presidency and whether it is able to form consensus. Okay. Up until now, you have seen, India acting as the voice of the global south. But it is also very primely and keenly positioned, as a medium between these aspirational countries, the global south, as well as the developed countries, the US, the Germany, the French, the UK, all of them. Whether it is able to forge a consensus between these two angles, at the same time, how is it able to forge some sort of consensus regarding the Russia-Ukraine crisis and its implication in the joint statement between the Western nations and Russia? That will be very keenly observed. Okay. And so this is why India's presidency is of extreme importance. Bear in mind, 2022, you had Indonesia, that was the president. 2024, next year, you're looking at Brazil, that will take over the G20 presidency, which is why it is a prime time for India. Because again, if you're looking at, if you have been following the joint communication statements after G7, after BRICS, one thing you will find is most countries now agree to the fact that India deserves a seat at the high table, which means you're looking at, reforms of the United Nations Security Council. However, you also need to appreciate the fact that if India is to go ahead and voice for that demand on an effective manner in a global platform, it needs to start acting as someone who is going to now set the rules rather than just accept the rules. That it can mediate and solve conflicts and crises. Okay, which is why this is a moment for India to transition from being a rule taker to a rule setter, a rule maker. Okay, and so which is why the declarations, outcome document, once again, my students, will be of prime importance. We should keep a close eye on each and every word that is used, because that will have connotations that we ought to be aware of, especially from the mains perspective. Right? Okay. Let's look at this question now. Question A for you. G20 can be best categorized as what? Group of underdeveloped and developing nations, exclusive forum of the global south, Forum for Economic Cooperation, or none of the above? You will let me know the answers in the chat box. What I suggest is that go ahead and use the chat box to give me the answers to today's questions from A to F. Okay, and the correct answers get figured in tomorrow on Monday morning's class, in fact, at 6:30. Sunny, good morning. Good morning. Welcome. Welcome. All right. Which of the following is not a member of the G20? Sunny, you have a paper on 3rd October. All the best. I hope you crack it well. All the best from my side. Okay. Which of the following is not a member of the G20? Right? Germany, Saudi Arabia, Mexico, or whether all of the above are members. You shall let me know. In fact, I would suggest that in terms of G20, look at the countries that are the members. You'll find that's 19 plus European Union. And also look at the observers. Which countries have been granted observer status? Which institutions are granted observer status is something that you ought to know of. Okay. Question C. Indonesia is the next president of the G20 in 2024. Statement B. Brazil was the president of the G20 in 2023. And statement C. G20, does it have a permanent secretariat or not? Okay. You will let me know the answers in the comment box. Right. Question D. G20 was founded in 1999 as a forum for finance ministers and central bank governors to discuss global financial issues. I've given you the whole history of G20 in less than 5 minutes. Okay. Go ahead and recall. If you have any doubts, go ahead and quickly rewind. Okay. And statement B. G20 was given heads of government status after the financial crisis of 2007. Identify the correct statements for me. Right. Okay, my dear students, that is how we roll here. We'll look at concepts right from the basics, the history, the outcomes, the future. Okay, that is what you need to know. Okay, insofar as a topic is concerned. Believe me, articles don't help you much insofar as the holistic knowledge of a topic does. Okay, because an article in a newspaper will capture one part of the topic. You ought to know the whole thing, which is why a topical approach to understanding current affairs is always recommended. And this is the central mantra that we focus on here at the Prelims to Interview Initiative 2. Okay, beginning on the 11th of September, which is not too far from now, right? Just a couple of days. Go ahead, quickly look at the course deliverables, some of the best known faculty, okay? And you look at conceptual knowledge rather than rote learning that is often employed at other places. We look at the conceptual clarity that is to be given to the students, okay? Being offered in 3 languages, English, that is bilingual, English and Hindi. And so you will find the sign up link in the description box. Okay. Now here is what you should do. Go to studyiq.com, look at the language that you want the course in, and thereafter look at the course deliverables. There's a whole the whole PDF is there. Look at the plan of action. Okay. Look at the testimonials that the current students and former students have left for you. Look at them, take an informed decision. And once you do decide to sign up for this, use the code BALIVE, as that assures you a very good discount. Okay, and more importantly, I become a part of your journey. So together, we make sure that your concepts are clear, that you have enough exposure to say MCQs, PYQs, mains questions, plus interview guidance to make sure that your Labasna dream comes true. Right? So just a couple of days, I suggest make haste because, well, the seats will eventually run out. Right. Yesterday, we had the much anticipated bilateral between Prime Minister Modi and President Biden, right? So let's look at what the joint communication between the communication that was released, okay, after the meeting, because that gives us a lot of fodder points insofar as our motivation for mains is concerned, right? So let's look at it. The leaders re-emphasized that the shared values of freedom, democracy, human rights, inclusion, pluralism, and equal opportunities are guaranteed. Yes. Now, if these are the fundamental bulwarks on which the India-US marriage is built on, what are the other areas of convergence? Because, well, these are the fundamental basis. Okay. Let's look at it. Reaffirm the importance of Quad. Now, what you find is that the Quad summit, this year we had the G20 summit in New Delhi. The Quad summit is coming up next year, where you will have the Quad members come, and then again, another declaration will ensue. Okay. So very important that President Biden has confirmed his availability and his inclusion for the Quad summit that is to be held next year in India. Okay. President Biden reaffirmed his support for a reformed United Nations Security Council, which is why my dear friends, the declaration that will follow today, the New Delhi Declaration, will be closely watched. Why? Because that is a test of India's ability to forge consensus between warring forces. Okay, and thus, if India has to, eventually will be getting a seat at the high table, but it has to showcase its mettle, and this is the best time to do it, right? So here, the President Biden has gone ahead and reaffirmed his support for a reformed United Nations Security Council and India's candidature for the UNSC non-permanent seat. Now, you do know that there are permanent members, non-permanent members, and so India's next candidacy is coming up in 2028-29. So India has already got US support regarding that. Okay. Lauded ongoing efforts. Now, the critical and emerging technology, ISET. Here is another further point for you, that India and US will now be going ahead and have in fact been converging and collaborating a lot on critical technology, on new technology that is coming up. Why? Eventually, you are looking at something that is again fair, open, inclusive, resilient, equally accessible. Yes, that is key to the growth and say inclusive growth that both the countries are focusing on. Okay, you're looking at a joint effort to the International Space Station coming up. NASA and ISRO will go ahead and make a joint effort for the ISS. Now, why? Okay, why is this sudden love? Because what you find is that because of the Russia-Ukraine crisis, Russia has now said that it does not want to continue its membership in the International Space Station. Given that the ISS is expected to be decommissioned, after all, it has got a certain lifespan. Okay, it is expected to be decommissioned, which means now NASA and US need able partners with the knowledge of, or at least comparable knowledge of spacefaring as Russia, to replace Russia. Now, which is the most obvious option here? The prime contender, it is India. Okay, which is why you find that now NASA and ISRO first looking at joint collaboration for the ISS and for human spaceflight cooperation by the end of this year. Okay, you're looking at resilient global semiconductor supply chain. Okay, if this was targeting Russia, this is targeting China. That eventually semiconductors that are critical to almost every tech, it can't be the monopoly of a particular country. Okay, and even though it might be a resource intensive task, if you go ahead and have international collaboration regarding it, it is quite likely that you will address a lot of the supply chain issues that arise vis-a-vis the global semiconductor industry. Okay, quantum entanglement exchange. Now, here is a platform which will facilitate international quantum exchange opportunities. You have SN Bose National Center for Basic Science. MCQ guys, please make a note of this. Okay, the Satyendra Nath Bose National Center for Basic Sciences, Kolkata, now a member of the Quantum Entanglement Exchange. You also have IIT Bombay that has now joined the Chicago Quantum Exchange as an international partner, right? So these two nations, prime importance for us to know. The leaders also hailed the signing of an implementation arrangement between the United Nations Science Foundation and India's Department of Biotechnology. Why? To enable scientific and technological research, especially in biomanufacturing innovations. And innovations, by the way, it remains a key factor here. We'll look at innovation handshake. Here it is. Okay, that a lot of focus is now being done on innovation, and what you find is that an ambitious innovation handshake agenda to include two anchor events, which will eventually, one being held in the United States, one being held in India. And why is that? You're bringing together the startups, private equity, venture capitalists, all of them coming together to now next give chart to the next range, the next stage of entrepreneurs and say companies. Okay, because eventually companies drive businesses, and so you need good companies, you need reliable companies, and need to handhold them right from the very beginning. Okay, so this is going to be a focus here, and more importantly, what we will discuss a lot in the coming days, that all disputes between India and United States at the WTO. Okay, at the WTO you have the Dispute Settlement Board, which goes and registers disputes, okay, between countries that may so arise. India and the US had 7 disputes total. Okay, all of them have been taken care of. Now they range from say import of steel to countervailing duties across say dairy products, many different products. All of that now a thing of the past. Okay. And so the Dispute Settlement Board of WTO has been notified that bilaterally all disputes have been resolved. Okay, So major news, in fact. The connotations of this can only be understood in detail in the days to come. But here is a fact for you that yes, India and the US on similar pages regarding the 7 ranges of disputes that so was between them. Okay. All right, let's look at this question, guys. Statement E, question E that I have for you. India is not a member of the Nuclear Suppliers Group, NSG, right? To be a member of the Nuclear Suppliers Group, member states need to sign the Nuclear Proliferation Treaty, the NPT, okay? And India has not signed the Nuclear Proliferation Treaty. You will let me know the correct statements in the chat box, okay? Here is a question which is linked, okay? Which is linked. You will find eventually, once you go ahead and research for this for 5 minutes, that this whole statement is linked in a sequence, all right? And India has a very fair point when it goes ahead and explains its position vis-a-vis the NSG and the NPT, all right? So we'll discuss this in detail on Monday, but here is your homework for you, right? So if you have any questions, by the way, we have discussed 2 very important topics, G20 Sherpas as well as the outcome document that was released last evening after the meeting between President Biden and Prime Minister Modi. If you have any particular doubts for me, okay, or if you'd like to offer me detailed feedback, well, here is my email ID, bhuvan.jha@studyiq.com, and this is my Instagram ID. So go ahead and connect with me, and if you have any particular doubts, I'll be more than happy to address them. Right. The last topic that I have for you, NASA's MOXIE. Okay, what is MOXIE? Mars Oxygen In Situ Resource Utilization Experiment. Please understand this. It is to be understood as a simple fact that NASA is looking to go ahead and eventually has done, in fact, create oxygen in a carbon dioxide rich atmosphere of Mars. And for that, what they have done is gone ahead and worked extensively on ISRU. Okay, ISRU. Okay, not to be confused with ISRO again. It has nothing to do with ISRO. Now, this ISRO is essentially in situ resource utilization. Okay, and what MOXIE has done is gone ahead and engaged in an electrochemical process and created, say, oxygen using the resources that are so available on the Martian surface. That whole concept, again, an emerging technology, is ISRU, ISRU, okay, in situ resource utilization. Please make a note of this from the exam perspective. I suggest, well, obviously you'll find the PDF uploaded in my Telegram channel, but still I suggest make a note of this. Amarjeet, good morning, welcome. Good to see you guys. So, the MOXIE experiment helping NASA prepare for human exploration of Mars. Why? Because if you're able to create oxygen out of the resources that are available on the Martian surface, well, you are looking at this habitation aspect. Eventually, the goal is that you are going to create some sort of colony on Mars. And for that, you need to have the same conditions as on Earth to a certain extent. Oxygen, a key part of those conditions. Well, that is being done in situ, using the resources available on the Martian surface. Okay, aim to produce oxygen from the Martian carbon dioxide atmosphere, which is located in the front side. Okay, this is located in the front side of the Perseverance rover, which is a part of the Mars mission by NASA. Okay, now MOXIE works using an electrochemical process. What it does is separates one oxygen atom from each molecule of carbon dioxide. Then they are analyzed to check the purity, the quantity of whatever it has done. It is essentially breaking down the carbon dioxide, okay, and creating oxygen using an electrochemical process. Okay, so let's look at the MOXIE. What has it done so far? Here is the tweet, by the way, that was released yesterday morning, 4:40 India time, I believe. Okay, so MOXIE has been generating oxygen aboard the Perseverance rover since its landing in 2021. In the last 2 years, in fact, MOXIE has gone ahead and created 122 grams of oxygen. Okay, twice what NASA wanted to go and create. Okay, now the long-term possibilities and ramification of this is essentially that you are looking at, say, life to go ahead and exist on Martian surface. And so the conditions that need, say, to sustain life have to be created there. And that should come using the resources that are available on Mars. Okay, that it is technologically, economically not feasible to carry the, say, raw materials from Earth to create your oxygen on Earth. That's not going to happen. Okay, MOXIE's efforts are a key enabler in that direction. So the oxygen produced is of 98% purity, making it suitable for both fuel and breathing purposes. And thus, here it is. The feasibility of extracting oxygen, a potential source for supplying breathable air or rocket fuel. So you're looking at obviously respiration plus the fuel aspect that has been taken care of due to MOXIE's efforts. Okay. Right. So that was NASA's MOXIE. Here is the question for you guys. What is ISRO related to? Have a look at this. What is ISRO related to? ISRO's new spaceport, using in situ resources, using ex situ resources, or none of the above. Once again, the questions A to F, please answer them in the comment box. The correct answers get featured on Monday morning. And more importantly, those who partake in this process, well, you will see that your current affairs knowledge eventually starts compounding over a period of time. Okay. The whole focus should be on solving questions, guys. Mere reading of the articles is insufficient. All right. Okay, my friends, that completes today's editorial edge on Saturday, the 9th of September. Right. If you have any particular doubts for me, once again, you have my Telegram channel as well as my email ID. This is my Telegram channel. Go ahead. I'll upload the PDF around say 12, around noon. Okay. And we do a lot of learning here. A lot of questions are put forward. A lot of videos you'll find, short gifts, all that to aid and help your understanding of key concepts. Okay. Right. So that concludes it, friends. Let's meet again on Monday morning. Right. I hope to have your support. Please do leave me a like if the discussion benefited you today. Okay. And if you would so wish, I would really appreciate it if you went ahead and shared this with those of your friends who are preparing for your civil services examination. Okay. Thanks for joining. Till I see you on Monday morning at 6:30 a.m. This is Bhuvan signing off. Have a productive weekend. Bye.